10-year-old boy astounds courtroom by demonstrating legal skills while defending his mother. Ethan Parker adjusted his striped blue tie with trembling hands, feeling the weight of every gaze upon him. The light blue suit his mother had bought, with such sacrifice, seemed enormous on his thin 10-year-old frame, but he knew he needed to appear serious at that moment. The judge banged the gavel, and silence fell over the courtroom. Mr. Ethan Parker has permission to speak in defense of his mother, Mrs. Sarah Parker, declared the magistrate, his voice echoing off the dark wooden walls. Ethan took a deep breath and stood up. Behind him, his mother Sarah remained seated at the defendant's table, her eyes red from weeks of crying. She had lost her voice from repeating over and over that she was not unfit to care for her own son, that she had stolen nothing from his father's inheritance, that it was all a cruel lie orchestrated by her late husband's family. The attorney for the Wilson family, Mr. Richard Bennett, watched Ethan with a sneer. At 65, he had won hundreds of cases and didn't believe a child could pose any threat to his work. Across the room, Ethan's great-uncle and great-aunt, Walter and Martha Wilson, whispered to each other, convinced the hearing would be a mere formality before they gained custody of the boy and full control of the $15 million inheritance left by the family patriarch. "Your Honor," Ethan began, his high voice cutting through the heavy courtroom air, "I know I'm just a child, but I want everyone here to know my mother would never do the terrible things they're saying about her." A low murmur spread through the audience. Ethan could see the skeptical faces of distant relatives, curious neighbors, and courthouse staff who had stopped to watch the unusual spectacle. His mother, Sarah, 42, fought back tears as she watched her son expose himself like this. "My mother works 16 hours a day cleaning offices to put food on the table and send me to school," Ethan continued, his voice growing steadier. "She never touched the money my grandfather left for me. In fact, she didn't even know that money existed until 3 months ago." Mr. Richard stood immediately. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we cannot allow a manipulated child to recite fabricated stories to—" "Fabricated stories?" Ethan interrupted, turning to face the lawyer. "Do you mean the story about my mother forging documents, or the one about her mistreating me?" The judge raised a hand for silence. "Proceed, young Ethan. But remember, this is a courtroom, not a theater stage." Ethan nodded respectfully. He had spent the last 2 weeks studying legal procedures at the public library, reading every page he could find on family law and inheritance. His mother thought he was just doing homework, but Ethan had a much more ambitious plan. 3 months ago, my mother got a letter saying I had inherited a fortune from my paternal grandfather, Charles Wilson, whom I never met, Ethan explained, pacing slowly before the jury. "My mother was confused because my father passed away when I was 2, and she never knew about any inheritance. She took the letter to the notary's office to understand better. Sarah remembered that day perfectly. She had just finished her morning shift at Wilson & Associates and was on her way to her second job when she stopped at the notary's office on Main Street. The notary, Mr. Samuel Miller, a short man with thick glasses, had examined the documents for nearly an hour before confirming everything was in order. That's when the problems began," Ethan continued. "A week later, my great-uncle Walter showed up at our house saying my mother was trying to steal what wasn't hers." Ethan turned to look directly at Walter Thompson, a 70-year-old man who owned 3 pharmacies in the area and was known for his local political influence. Walter averted his gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "He said my mother wasn't capable of handling so much money and that I should live with him and Aunt Martha until I turned 18. He claimed it was for my own good." Martha Thompson, seated beside her husband, adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. At 68, she had raised 3 successful children and considered herself an authority on child rearing. In her opinion, a cleaning woman could never give Ethan the refined upbringing he deserved. The attorney, Mr. Richard, stood up again. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that supports our legitimate concern for this child's well-being." "What evidence?" Ethan asked, before the judge could respond. Mr. Richard opened his brown leather briefcase and pulled out several photographs. "These photos show the poor conditions the boy lives in. A 2-room apartment in a dangerous neighborhood, old furniture, a lack of basic resources for proper education. Ethan felt his face grow hot. Those pictures had been taken without permission, probably while he and his mother were at work. He could see his single bed in the room he shared with Sarah, the small TV in the living room, the old fridge in the cramped kitchen. "It's true our home is simple," Ethan admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But it's always clean. My mother works hard to keep everything in order, and I have everything I need: food, clean clothes, care, and love." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. "Love doesn't pay for private school, young Ethan," Mr. Richard interjected coldly. "Love doesn't guarantee you'll have access to the best opportunities this inheritance can provide." Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. He knew men like that lawyer, the kind who showed up at the office where his mother worked the night shift and treated her as if she were invisible. "And you think taking a child away from his mother is giving him opportunities?" Ethan shot back. "Do you have children, Mr. Richard?" "That's irrelevant," the lawyer replied, clearly irritated. "I think it's very relevant," Ethan insisted, "because if you have kids, you should know what a mother's love is. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be here telling me what's best for me." A murmur of approval rippled through part of the courtroom. The judge, Judge William Harrison, a 50-year-old man with extensive experience in family cases, watched Ethan with growing interest. In 30 years on the bench, he had rarely seen a child so articulate in court. Sarah could no longer hold back her tears. Her son was there, just 10 years old, fighting for her in a way most adults wouldn't dare. She remembered how Ethan had always been different from other kids. At 4, he was already reading on his own. At 6, he was helping classmates with their homework. At 8, he was questioning teachers about things he didn't fully understand. "Your Honor," Mr. Richard resumed, "I also present this psychological evaluation, which demonstrates the emotional stress the boy has been under due to the instability of his current situation." Ethan turned sharply. "What psychological evaluation? I've never seen a psychologist." "The evaluation was prepared based on observations by qualified professionals," the lawyer explained. "Observations made where, when, by whom?" Ethan asked, his voice rising a pitch. The judge intervened. "Mr. Richard, could you specify the circumstances of these observations?" The lawyer hesitated for a moment before answering. "The observations were made by professionals hired by the Wilson family during visits to the minor's school and home environment." Ethan froze. They had hired people to spy on him and his mother. People who posed as school staff, curious neighbors, maybe even clients of the offices where Sarah worked. "This is spying," Ethan exclaimed. "You had no right to do this." "Ethan, stay calm," and the judge gently warned. "This is a legal procedure when there are concerns about a child's well-being." But Ethan wasn't feeling calm. He felt violated, invaded. All those times he had noticed strangers watching him at school, all those odd questions some neighbors had asked about his family in recent weeks. It all made sense now. "Concerns," Ethan repeated, his voice heavy, with indignation. "The only concern they have is about the money my grandfather left for me." Walter Thompson stood up abruptly. "That's an insult. We love this boy and only want what's best for him. Then why did you never show up in my life before?" Ethan turned to face him. "Where was this love when my mother stayed? Up with me for 3 nights at Mercy Hospital when I had pneumonia? Where was it when she sold her wedding ring to buy my school books?" The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Sarah quietly sobbing. She had indeed sold the ring, the only physical memory she had of her husband, to make sure Ethan had the school supplies he needed for 6th grade. Martha Thompson whispered something in her husband's ear, and he sat back down, his face red with anger. "Ethan," the judge said softly, "you show impressive maturity for your age, but I need you to understand that this court has a responsibility to ensure you grow up in an environment that provides the best possible conditions for your development." "And you think taking me away from my mother will give me the best conditions?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Do you know what's the most important thing a child needs to develop well?" The judge gestured for him to continue. Emotional security, Ethan answered. I read about it at the library. Children who grow up secure in their parents' love become more confident and successful adults than those who grow up with lots of money, but no real affection. Mr. Richard scoffed. Romantic self-help theories aren't valid legal arguments. It's not a theory, Ethan shot back. It's science. It's in the child psychology books I studied. Do you want me to name the authors? The lawyer looked at Ethan with a mix of surprise and irritation. He hadn't expected a 10-year-old to be prepared for an academic debate. All right, young Ethan, Mr. Richard said sarcastically. Let's get to the practical facts then. Your mother makes $1,200 a month cleaning offices. How does she plan to pay for a private school that costs $3,000 a month? How will she buy $400 textbooks? How will she pay for English lessons, music, sports? Ethan felt a lump in his throat. That was exactly the question that had kept him awake at night for weeks. He knew his mother couldn't afford all the things rich kids had. My mother can use part of the inheritance for my education, Ethan replied, though his voice sounded less confident. Ah, so she plans to use the inheritance money? Mr. Richard jumped at the opening. Interesting. Just a moment. Ago you said she never touched the money. Ethan realized he had walked into a trap. His mother had indeed never touched the inheritance money, which was locked in a court-managed account until the dispute was resolved. But admitting she would use the money in the future gave ammunition to his great-uncle's arguments. She would only use what's necessary for my education, Ethan stammered. Not for anything else. And who would guarantee that, Mr. Richard pressed? Who would oversee these expenses? A woman with no formal education who has never managed more than $1,000 a month would be responsible for a fortune. Curve 15 million. Ethan felt the ground sway beneath his feet. For the first time since he started speaking, he didn't have an immediate answer. The lawyer had a point. His mother had never handled that kind of money before. The silence stretched for long seconds. Ethan could feel the stares of everyone in the room waiting for his response. His mother had her head down, likely humiliated by the lawyer's words. My mother can learn, Ethan finally said, but his voice sounded weak. Can learn, Mr. Richard repeated. Your Honor, we're talking about $15 million. This isn't money for educational experiments. Ethan looked at his mother and saw a tear roll down her face. Sarah was feeling diminished, as if she were truly incompetent to care for her own son. That was exactly what the Wilsons wanted, to make her feel small and incapable. Then, Ethan had an idea. Mr. Richard, he said, regaining firmness in his voice, you said my mother has no formal education, right? Correct. She didn't even finish high school. And you think that makes her less intelligent? Not necessarily less intelligent, but certainly less prepared to handle complex financial matters. Ethan nodded and then turned to the jury. My mother stopped studying at 16 because her father got sick and she had to work to support the family. She always dreamed of going back to school but never had the chance because she had to work to raise me. He paused and looked directly at Mr. Richard. Do you know how many books my mother reads a month? The lawyer seemed confused by the question. How would I know that? 3 books a month, Ethan answered. She borrows them from the public. The library every Wednesday. She reads about history, business, psychology, philosophy. She says it's never too late to learn. Sarah raised her head, surprised. She didn't know Ethan had noticed her reading habits. 3 books a month, Ethan repeated, now addressing the entire courtroom. That's 36 books a year. In 10 years, she'll have read 360 books. How many adults with college degrees read 360 books in 10 years? The argument caught everyone off guard. Even the judge seemed impressed by the boy's reasoning. And there's more, Ethan continued, sensing he had regained control. My mother has managed our money for 8 years. There's never been a day without food on the table, never a day without bus fare, never a bill left unpaid. With $1,200 a month, she works miracles. Ethan walked toward the bench where his great-uncle sat. Now tell me, my great-uncle Walter, who owns 3 pharmacies, has he ever faced financial difficulties? Walter hesitated before answering. Yes, like any business owner. How many times? Ethan pressed. I fail to see how this is relevant, Mr. Richard interjected. It's very relevant, Ethan countered, because if we're discussing financial management skills, we need to compare track records. The judge motioned for Ethan to continue. Uncle Walter, have you ever had to close a pharmacy due to financial troubles? Walter turned red. Once, but it was under extraordinary circumstances. And has my mother ever had to leave our home because of money problems? No, but never, Ethan finished. In 8 years raising me alone, we've never been forced to move due to lack of money. Can you say the same about your pharmacies? The awkward silence that followed gave Ethan the answer he needed. He'd turned the tables, at least temporarily. Besides, Ethan continued, gaining confidence, I read the inheritance documents. My grandfather, Charles Thompson, made it very clear. The money should be used for my education and well-being until I turn 18. He left nothing to my great-uncles. Martha Thompson shifted uncomfortably in her seat. That's because your grandfather knew we were already financially stable, she murmured. Or because he knew you better than you think, Ethan replied, his voice carrying wisdom beyond his years. The judge studied Ethan for a long moment before speaking. Young Ethan, you've defended yourself impressively, but I need to ask some direct questions. Do you understand that regardless of your mother's capabilities, managing such a significant inheritance could be overwhelming? Ethan nodded. I understand, Your Honor. That's why I've already thought of a solution. What solution? An independent, court-appointed administrator, Ethan answered promptly. Someone chosen by the court with no ties to either side, who would oversee expenses related to my education and well-being until I turn 18. The suggestion caused murmurs in the courtroom. Even Mr. Richard seemed momentarily caught off guard. This way, Ethan continued, I can keep living with my mother, who I love and trust, but the inheritance spending would be supervised by a qualified professional. The judge leaned forward, clearly interested. Have you considered the supervision details? Yes, sir, the administrator could authorize education, healthcare, housing, and basic needs expenses upon receiving budgets and justifications. My mother would care for me, but major financial decisions would be shared. Sarah looked at her son with pride and astonishment. Ethan had found a solution she hadn't imagined. Mr. Richard, however, wasn't ready to concede. Your Honor, this proposal still doesn't address the fundamental issue, the child's living environment. A small apartment in a dangerous neighborhood isn't suitable for someone with access to considerable wealth. Ethan turned to the lawyer. What neighborhood do you live in, Mr. Richard? That's irrelevant to the case. It is relevant, Ethan insisted. If we're discussing dangerous neighborhoods, let's be specific. Where do you live? The lawyer hesitated. In Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills, Ethan repeated, one of the city's most expensive areas. Do you feel safe there? Of course. Do you know there were 3 home robberies in Beverly Hills last month? Ethan asked. I read it in the paper. Mr. Richard seemed surprised. And do you know how many robberies happened in my neighborhood during that time? Ethan pressed on. 1, because in my neighborhood, people know each other, protect each other, watch out for one another. In Beverly Hills, people live isolated in their mansions, not even knowing their next-door neighbors. Ethan began pacing before the jury again. Safety isn't about money, it's about community. In my building, Mrs. Rose from the 2nd floor helps me with math when my mom is working. Mr. John at the gate always asks if everything's okay when he sees me pass by. The Johnson family from the 3rd floor gives me a ride to school when it's raining. He paused and looked directly at Martha Wilson. Aunt Martha, do you know your neighbors? Martha hesitated. Of course I do. Their names? Well, all of them. You don't need to know every neighbor. In my building, I know the names of all 32 families, Ethan said, and they all know mine. That's real safety. His argument was working. Ethan could see some jurors nodding in approval, but he knew he couldn't relax. Mr. Richard was too experienced to be defeated easily. Very poetic, young Ethan, the lawyer said sarcastically, but poetry doesn't solve practical matters. How will your mother balance work with the new responsibilities that will come up? Private. School meetings, extracurricular activities, educational trips. Ethan felt another lump in his throat. It was true his mother worked long hours and couldn't always attend every school event. "My mom will figure it out," he replied, but his voice sounded less convincing. "She'll figure it out?" Mr. Richard repeated. "Will she quit her job? And if the inheritance runs out, how will you live?" "The inheritance won't run out if it's managed well," Ethan argued. "But it could," the lawyer pressed, "and then your mother will have been out of work for years with no updated professional references, no way to start over." Ethan felt cornered. For the first time, he realized he might not have all the answers. Maybe the problems were more complicated than he'd imagined. That's when his mother stood up. "May I speak, Your Honor?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The judge nodded. Sarah walked over to stand beside Ethan and placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "My son is fighting for me in a way I don't even deserve," she began, her voice growing steadier. "He's trying to solve adult problems with a wisdom that amazes me every day." She turned to face Mr. Richard. "You're right when you say I don't have a formal education. It's true. I dropped out to care for my sick father. But you're wrong when you say that makes me unfit to raise my son." Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. "I work 16 hours a day, but I've never missed an important school meeting for Ethan. I sleep 4 hours a night, but I always find time to help him with homework. I don't have much money, but he's never gone to bed hungry." She looked at Walter and Martha Wilson. "You offer a big house, private school, expensive courses. That's wonderful. But can you give him what I give? Can you stay up all night when he has a fever? Can you feel it in your heart when he's sad? Can you love him more than life itself?" Martha Wilson looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "Sarah," the judge said gently, "no one is questioning your love for Ethan. But love alone may not be enough to ensure he has every opportunity he deserves." "You're right," Sarah agreed, surprising everyone. "Love alone isn't enough. That's why I have a proposal." Ethan looked at his mother curiously. She hadn't mentioned any proposal. "I promise to go back to school," Sarah announced. "I'll finish high school and get a degree in business administration. I'll learn everything I need to manage my son's inheritance as well as possible." The statement caused another stir in the courtroom. "And how do you plan to study, work, and take care of Ethan at the same time?" Mr. Richard asked. "I'll reduce my workload," Sarah replied. "With the court supervision," Ethan suggested, "we can use a small portion of the inheritance for our basic needs. That will allow me to work less and study more." Ethan looked at his mother with renewed admiration. She had managed to turn his proposal into something even better. "Besides," Sarah continued, "I agree to supervision not just over the expenses, but also over my education. The court-appointed administrator can track my progress and ensure I'm actually improving myself." The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed by the turn of events. "Mrs. Sarah, do you understand you're taking on a very serious commitment? Finishing your education while caring for Ethan and managing a significant inheritance won't be easy." "Your Honor, I raised my son alone for 8 years, working 16-hour days," Sarah answered firmly. "If I could do that, I can also study and prepare myself to give him the future he deserves." Mr. Richard realized he was losing ground and changed tactics. "Very noble, Mrs. Sarah. But what if you fail? What if you can't keep up with your studies? What if Ethan suffers the consequences of this experiment?" "Then I accept that custody should be transferred to the Wilson family," Sarah replied without hesitation. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stared at his mother, wide-eyed. "Mom, you can't say that." "I can and I must," Sarah answered, looking her son in the eye. "Because I trust myself. I know I'll succeed, but if for some reason I fail, you deserve the guarantee that you'll be taken care of in the best way possible." Ethan felt tears burning in his eyes. His mother was risking everything, betting on herself in a way that took extraordinary courage. Walter Wilson whispered something to his lawyer, who nodded and stood. "Your Honor, we appreciate Mrs. Sarah's determination, but this only confirms our original concern. We're talking about a risky experiment with a child's life." "An experiment?" Ethan turned to the lawyer, his voice thick with indignation. "My mother raising a child alone for 8 years was an experiment? Her keeping me in school, fed, and loved was an experiment?" He walked until he stood right in front of Mr. Richard. "Do you know the difference between my mother and my great-uncles? My mother is willing to change, to grow, to learn new things, to give me the best. They just want me to adapt to who they already are." He turned to the courtroom. "My mother will study business to manage my inheritance. She'll learn about investments, financial planning, resource management. In 2 years, she'll know more about these things than many people born rich." Ethan looked straight at Walter Wilson. "Uncle Walter, when was the last time you learned something new? When was the last time you stepped out of your comfort zone to grow as a person?" Walter visibly squirmed at the question. "I don't need to learn anything new. I have enough experience." "Experience running pharmacies," Ethan shot back. "But do you understand child education, teen psychology, emotional development? That's what professionals are for." "Exactly," Ethan exclaimed. "That's what professionals are for. Just like there are professionals to manage inheritances. The difference is those professionals will work for me and my mother. They won't replace us." The argument was solid, and Ethan could see he was regaining ground. "Besides," he continued, "I want to ask everyone here a question. What is the real purpose of my education?" The judge motioned for him to go on. "To teach me how to be a responsible adult, capable of making good decisions and contributing to society, right?" Ethan asked rhetorically. "Then tell me, what life lesson would be better for me? To see my mother give up when challenges arise, or to watch her fight, study, and grow to give me her best?" Ethan paused to let the question sink in. "If you hand me over to my great-uncles, you'll be teaching me that when things get hard, it's better to let others handle it. But if you let my mother fight and succeed, you'll teach me that no obstacle is too big when you have determination and love." Sarah was crying again, but now they were tears of pride. Her son had grown so much in the last few months that sometimes she forgot he was still a child. "And there's one more thing," Ethan added, his voice growing more emotional. "If you separate me from my mother now, you'll be teaching me that money is more important than love, that being rich is more valuable than being happy. Do you think that's the lesson a 10-year-old should learn?" The room was utterly silent. Even Mr. Richard seemed at a loss for words. The judge looked at Ethan for a long moment before speaking. "Young Ethan, in 30 years on the bench, I've never seen a child demonstrate such maturity and clarity of thought. Your arguments are remarkable." Ethan felt a momentary relief, but he knew the trial wasn't over yet. "However," the judge continued, "I must consider every aspect of this complex situation. I'll call a 1-hour recess to review all the proposals presented." The gavel struck and people began to disperse. Ethan turned to his mother, who pulled him into a tight hug. "You were amazing," Sarah whispered in his ear. "I'm so proud of you." "Mom, do you really want to bet everything on your studies?" Ethan asked, still worried about the risky proposal she had made. "Ethan, sweetheart, I've been studying in secret for 2 years," Sarah confessed. "I already finished high school through an online program. I was waiting for the right time to tell you." Ethan was stunned. "You finished high school?" "Last year, and I've already signed up for the SAT to study business. The test is in 3 months. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Why didn't you say that in there?" "Because I wanted you to see that I'm willing to change and grow, not just that I already have," Sarah explained. "I wanted them to understand my determination, not just my results." At that moment, Ethan realized his mother was even more incredible than he'd imagined. She had been secretly preparing for a better future for 2 years. Across the room, Walter and Martha Thompson were whispering with Mr. Richard. They seemed uneasy about how the trial was unfolding. "We need something stronger," Mr. Richard murmured. "The boy is too articulate, and the mother made a smart move." "What do you suggest?" Walter asked. "We'll question the family's emotional stability. The trauma of the father she never got over, the constant financial pressure, the social isolation." Martha hesitated. "Wouldn't that be too unfair?" "Martha, we're talking about $15 million, Walter reminded her. "And the boy's future. We can't let sentimentality stop us from doing what's right." But Mr. Richard didn't know Ethan had exceptional hearing and was listening to their conversation. The boy felt anger rising in his chest. They were planning. To attack his mother on personal painful grounds. Ethan approached the trio quietly. "Uncle Walter," he said suddenly, making them jump. "Can I ask you something?" Walter turned around, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "What do you want, Ethan? Why did you never want to meet my father?" The question caught Walter off guard. "What do you mean? My father was your nephew, your brother Charles's son. When he married my mother, did you even go to the wedding?" Walter hesitated. "It was complicated circumstances." "You didn't approve of the marriage because my mother was poor, didn't you?" Ethan pressed. "Ethan, that's not the point right now." "It is the point," Ethan interrupted. "Because you're standing here saying you care about me, but you never cared about my father when he was alive." Martha tried to step in. "Ethan, sweetheart, these are very complex matters you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Ethan shot back. "You all looked down on my father for marrying a poor woman. You looked down on my mother for 8 years. And now you want to race me because you found out I inherited money." Ethan stepped closer to Walter. "If I hadn't inherited anything, would you even be here today?" The uncomfortable silence was the answer Ethan expected. "That's exactly what I thought," he said, turning his back on them. When the hearing resumed, Mr. Richard was visibly nervous. The conversation with Ethan had shaken his confidence. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, "I'd like to address what we believe is a fundamental issue in this case, the emotional stability of the minor, Ethan." Ethan stood up immediately. "My emotional stability? You mean the fact that I'm here defending my mother instead of sitting at home crying?" "Ethan," the judge warned, "let Mr. Richard finish." "My apologies, Your Honor," Ethan said, but remained standing. Mr. Richard continued. "What we're emphasizing is that Ethan grew up in an environment of emotional deprivation, without a father figure, with a mother constantly absent due to overwork, no contact with extended family. Emotional deprivation?" Ethan cut in again, his voice rising. "Ethan, sit down," the judge ordered firmly. Ethan obeyed, but his eyes burned with indignation. "As I was saying," Mr. Richard went on, "we believe this deprivation may have caused a forced and artificial maturity, a need to take on responsibilities that aren't appropriate for his age." "And what evidence supports this?" the judge asked. "The boy's own behavior today. No 10-year-old should be here trying to resolve complex legal matters. This proves he was forced to grow up too fast due to the instability of his home life." Ethan felt his blood boil. They were trying to use his intelligence and maturity against him. The judge looked at Ethan. "Would you like to respond to that?" Ethan stood slowly, trying to control his anger. "Your Honor, Mr. Richard is saying I'm too mature for a 10-year-old, right? That is the claim, yes. And he's saying that's bad, that it means I've been emotionally damaged." "Correct." Ethan nodded, then turned to Mr. Richard. "Mr. Richard, do you have children?" "I have 2. How old?" 15 and 12. "Are they mature for their age?" "They're normal kids." "That's not what I asked," Ethan insisted. "Are they mature?" "Reasonably, yes." "Are you proud of their maturity?" Mr. Richard hesitated, sensing the trap. "Yes, I am." "Then why is my maturity a problem? But theirs is something to be proud of. Because theirs is the result of proper upbringing, not deprivation." "Deprivation?" Ethan's voice rose again. "Mr. Richard, do you know how many kids my age can defend themselves alone in a courtroom?" Probably none." Exactly, none. Does that mean I'm special or troubled?" "Well, that depends." "Depends on what?" Ethan pressed. "If a 10-year-old boy can play piano like an adult, is he a prodigy or a victim? If he can solve advanced math problems, is he brilliant or damaged?" Ethan started walking again. "The difference, Mr. Richard, is that my maturity bothers you because it lets me see through your lies." "Ethan," the judge warned sternly. "My apologies, Your Honor, but aren't they lies?" Ethan turned to the judge. "They're trying to make me seem broken because I'm smart. They're trying to use my ability to think as proof that I need to be separated from my mother." Ethan stared back at Mr. Richard. "If I were a quiet boy who accepted everything without question, you'd say I'm a normal, healthy child. But because I question, because I think, because I fight for my family, then I'm troubled. The lawyer was clearly losing the argument again. "What we're trying to protect is your childhood, Ethan," he attempted. "You shouldn't be worried about financial and legal matters. You should be playing, studying things suitable for your age." "And who says I don't play?" Ethan shot back. "Who says I don't study age-appropriate things?" He turned to the audience. "Does anyone here want to know my favorite school subject?" Ethan asked rhetorically. "Jim, I love playing soccer. My favorite team is the Yankees. My favorite player is Christian Pulisic." Several people in the audience smiled. "No, what TV show I like most?" Ethan continued. "Cartoons, especially Cartoon Network. My favorite is The Amazing World of Gumball." He paused. "Know what my biggest dream is?" Ethan asked, his voice softening. "To have a dog. I've always wanted one, but our house is small and my mum works a lot." Ethan looked straight at Mr. Richard. "Does that sound like a boy who lost his childhood, Mr. Richard? Or like a boy who can be both a kid and mature when the situation calls for it?" The silence that followed was broken by scattered applause from the audience. The judge banged his gavel to restore order. "The issue," Ethan continued when silence returned, "isn't whether I'm too mature. The issue is whether that maturity is good or bad. And I say it's good because it helps me understand what really matters in life." Ethan stepped closer to the jury box. "Know what really makes me sad? Not living in a small house. Not having expensive clothes, not traveling to exotic places. What makes me sad is thinking I might lose my mum over money." His voice wavered. "My mom is the most important person in the world to me. She might not have a college degree, might not know how to manage $15 million, might not live in a mansion, but she knows how to scratch my head just right when I'm nervous. She tells stories that help me sleep. Her hugs fix any problem." Ethan turned to Walter and Martha. "Thompson, can you do that? Do you know how I like my hair brushed? That I'm scared of the dark and need a nightlight? That I hate onions in my food? That when I'm sick I just want to cling to my mom?" Martha Thompson's eyes were wet. "Because if you don't know these things," Ethan went on, "then it doesn't matter how many millions you have. You can't give me what I really need." Ethan walked back to his mother's side. "My mother knows every detail of my life because she built this life with me day after day for 10 years. You want to give me a new life, but I don't want a new life. I want my life just better." Sarah was openly crying now, as were several others in the courtroom. "And do you know why I'm here defending my mother?" Ethan asked, his voice regaining strength. "It's not because someone forced me. It's not because I'm too mature. It's because she taught me that when you love someone, you fight for them. She fought for me every day of my life. Now it's my turn to fight for her." Ethan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, if you separate me from my mother, you'll be taking away my chance to repay all the love she's given me. You'll be stopping me from seeing her grow and thrive. You'll be teaching me that when things get hard, it's better to give up." He paused for a long moment before continuing. "But if you let us stay together, you'll see something amazing happen. You'll see my mother graduate from college. You'll see her learn to manage the inheritance. You'll see our small but strong family grow and prosper." Ethan looked around the courtroom. "And you'll see that love, when given the chance to flourish, can move mountains." The absolute silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. Many people were visibly moved. Even Mr. Richard seemed shaken. The judge cleared his throat before speaking. "Young Ethan, your words were extraordinary. Rarely do I see such eloquence and genuine emotion in a courtroom." Ethan nodded respectfully, but his heart was racing. He had given it his all, poured out every feeling. "However," the judge continued, "I must make a decision based not only on emotions but also on practical and legal considerations." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach. "Therefore, I will order a 6-month evaluation period," the judge announced. "During this time, Ethan will remain in his mother's custody, but under strict judicial supervision." Ethan and Sarah exchanged a look of relief and apprehension. Mrs. Sarah must immediately enroll in a higher education program for business administration or financial management, the judge went on. "She must submit monthly reports on her academic progress." "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied promptly. "A court-appointed administrator will oversee all expenses related to the inheritance. No amount over $2,000 may be withdrawn without prior authorization." Ethan nodded, pleased with the measure. Additionally, the judge continued, social workers will conduct regular visits to assess Ethan's living conditions and emotional well-being. Walter Thompson stood up. And if Mrs. Sarah fails to meet these requirements? In that case, the judge replied, custody will automatically transfer to the Thompson family. Ethan shuddered. They had 6 months to prove they deserved to stay together. But, the judge added, looking directly at Walter, if after 6 months Mrs. Sarah has met all the requirements and Ethan is well cared for and happy, custody will be permanently granted to her with no further challenges allowed. Mr. Richard whispered something to Walter, who nodded reluctantly. I accept the terms, Your Honor, Walter said formally. And you, Ethan and Sarah? The judge asked. We accept, they replied in unison. The judge banged the gavel. It is decided. The case will be reassessed in 6 months. This hearing is adjourned. People began to disperse, but Ethan stood still for a moment, trying to process everything. That had happened. They had won an important battle, but the war wasn't over yet. Sarah hugged her son tightly. We did it, my love. We got a chance. It's just a chance, Mom, Ethan reminded her. Now comes the hardest part. As they walked out of the courthouse, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the next 6 months. His mother would have to work, study, and take care of him all. At once. It would be a huge challenge, but he was determined to help her in every way possible. Across the courthouse yard, Walter and Martha Thompson were speaking with Mr. Richard in hushed tones. 6 months isn't much time, the lawyer reassured them. She'll burn herself out trying to do everything at once. It's impossible to work, study, and raise a child to the standard the court will demand. Are you sure? Martha asked. The boy is very determined, and she seemed highly motivated. Martha, be realistic, Walter cut in. Sarah is 42, has worked hard labor for 20 years, and never set foot in a university. Do you really think she can keep up with a business degree? Mr. Richard nodded. Besides, we'll be watching their every move. Any slip-up, any low grade, any issue with Ethan will be documented and used in our favor. Ethan, walking toward the parking lot, caught fragments of the conversation and felt an even fiercer determination rise in his chest. They didn't just have to succeed in the next 6 months. They had to be perfect. That night in their small 2-room apartment, Ethan and Sarah sat at the kitchen table to plan the coming months. Mom, are you sure you can do this? Ethan asked, worried by the exhaustion on her face. Ethan, sweetheart, I have to, Sarah replied firmly. It's not about wanting to anymore, it's our only chance to stay together. Ethan nodded and pulled out a notebook he'd brought from school. Then let's get organized. First, let's see how much time you have to study. Sarah smiled as she watched her son take charge so practically. Well, I work from 6 in the morning to noon at the construction office, and from 2 to 6 in the afternoon at the vet clinic, she listed. That leaves evenings and weekends. And how much sleep do you need? Ethan asked, jotting notes. At least 6 hours to function properly. Ethan did some quick math. That gives us about 4 hours a night for studying plus weekends. It should be enough, especially if I help with chores. Sarah looked at her son with admiration. Ethan, you don't have to give up your childhood for me. Mom, Ethan said seriously, my childhood won't mean anything if I can't spend it with you. Besides, studying together will be fun. Sarah felt her eyes well up again. Her son was willing to sacrifice his free time to help her succeed. All right, she agreed. Then we'll study together, but on one condition, you still make time to play and be a kid. Ethan grinned. Deal, but you have to promise me something too. What? If you get too tired or feel like you're falling behind, you tell me. We'll figure it out together. Sarah held out her hand. Promised. Ethan shook his mother's hand, sealing the agreement. The next morning, Sarah woke at 5 as usual, but there was something different in her expression. For the first time in months, she looked hopeful. As she made breakfast, she thought about what had happened in court the day before. Ethan had been incredible, braver and more articulate than most adults she knew, but he'd also been a child, vulnerable and afraid of losing his mother. Good morning, Mum, Ethan said, appearing in the kitchen already dressed for school. Good morning, sweetheart. Sleep well? I dreamed you were wearing a cap and gown, receiving your diploma. Ethan replied with a smile. Sarah laughed. Slow down, son. First, I need to get accepted into college. You will, Ethan said with absolute conviction, and I'll be there on your graduation day cheering louder than anyone. After Ethan left for school, Sarah headed to work with renewed energy. At the construction company's office, she cleaned the rooms more carefully than ever, but her mind was occupied with other thoughts. During her lunch break, she went to the nearest university to inquire about the enrollment process for the business administration program. The secretary, a young woman with glasses, greeted her warmly. Do you have your high school diploma? The employee asked. I do, Sarah replied, showing the certificate she had earned the previous year. Great. The entrance exam for next semester is in 2 months. Do you have time to prepare? Sarah hesitated. 2 months wasn't much time, especially considering her work schedule. I'll make it work, she answered determinedly. The employee handed her a brochure with all the information about the program and the admissions process. There's also the option of applying through the SAT, she explained, if you've taken the test in the last few years. I took it last year, Sarah replied quickly. I scored 720. The employee looked impressed. Wow, that's an excellent score. With that, you have a great chance of getting in directly through the SAT without needing to take the entrance exam. Sarah felt a wave of relief. She had taken the SAT more out of curiosity than concrete plans, but now that decision could change her life. When will the results come out? She asked. In 3 weeks. But with your score, you can start preparing. It's almost certain you'll get in. Sarah left the university feeling more confident. Maybe the next 6 months wouldn't be as impossible as she'd imagined. That afternoon, at her second job at the veterinary clinic, Sarah told Mrs. Nancy, the owner, about her situation. Sarah, what's all this about? Mrs. Nancy, a 60-year-old woman who had always treated Sarah with kindness, asked with concern. It's complicated, Mrs. Nancy. My late husband's family is trying to take Ethan from me because of an inheritance. Mrs. Nancy shook her head, outraged. That's ridiculous. You're an exemplary mother. Ethan is a polite, smart, well-cared-for boy. Thank you, Mrs. Nancy, but now I have to prove it legally. I need to get a degree in business administration and pass with good grades. Mrs. Nancy thought for a moment. Sarah, how about this? I'll adjust your schedule here. Instead of working from 2 to 6, you'll work from 2 to 5. It's 1 hour less, but you'll have more time to study. Sarah was moved by her boss's generosity. Mrs. Nancy, you don't have to do this. I need the money. Sarah, Mrs. Nancy interrupted, you've worked for me for 3 years. Never missed a day, never been late, never caused any trouble. You're the most reliable employee I've ever had. It's the least I can do to help. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. Thank you so much, Mrs. Nancy. I'll never forget this. When Ethan came home from school that day, he found his mother smiling in the kitchen. Mom, you look different, he observed. I have good news, Sarah announced. First, I might not need to take the entrance exam. My SAT score from last year could be enough to get me in. Ethan cheered. That's awesome. And what's the second? Good news? Mrs. Nancy adjusted my schedule. I'll have an extra hour every day to study. Ethan hugged his mother. See? Things are falling into place. Good people are on our side. That night they sat together at the kitchen table. Sarah with the study materials she had gotten from the university. Ethan with his school assignments. Mom, can I ask you something? Ethan said after a while. Of course, son. Are you scared? Sarah stopped writing and looked at Ethan. I'm very scared, she admitted. Scared I won't keep up with the classes, scared of getting bad grades, scared of losing you. And what do we do when we're scared? Sarah smiled. It was a question she always asked Ethan when he was nervous about something. We face our fear by doing what needs to be done, she answered, repeating the words she always told her. Son, exactly, Ethan agreed, and we'll face it together. They went back to studying, working in comfortable silence. Outside, the night was cold, but inside the small apartment, there was a feeling of warmth and hope. 2 weeks later, Sarah got a phone call that would change everything. Mrs. Sarah Parker, the voice on the other end asked. Yes, speaking. This is the State University Admissions Office. I have good news about your SAT application. Sarah sat on the bed, her heart racing. Yes, you've been accepted into the business administration program. Classes start this coming Monday. Sarah stayed silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Are you sure? She asked, almost disbelieving. Absolutely. You ranked 10th overall. Congratulations. When Ethan came home from school that day, he found his mother dancing alone in the living room. Mom, what happened to him? He asked, laughing at the sight. Sweetheart, Sarah said, taking Ethan's hands. I got in. I was accepted into college. Ethan shouted with joy and started dancing with her. They spun around the small living room, laughing and celebrating as if they'd won the lottery. I knew it, Ethan exclaimed. I knew you'd do it. Classes start Monday, Sarah said, still not fully believing it. Monday, Ethan counted. That's in 4 days. Yeah, Sarah agreed, reality sinking in. 4 days. To get organized, buy supplies, adjust schedules. Ethan saw panic starting to creep onto his mother's face. Take it easy, Mum, he said, placing his hands on her shoulders. Let's make a list of everything we need to do and tackle one thing at a time. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. Let's get organized. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning the next few days. Ethan took on more household responsibilities so his mother could focus on preparing for college. On Monday morning, Sarah was more nervous than she'd ever been in her life. She had woken up at 4 in the morning, unable to fall back asleep. Mom, you'll do great, Ethan said during breakfast. Remember what you always tell me before tests? What? That we've studied everything we could, so now we just have to trust ourselves and do our best. Sarah smiled and kissed her son's forehead. Thank you for reminding me of my own words, sweetheart. The first week of classes was a whirlwind. Sarah felt like a fish out of water among classmates 20 years younger. The professors talked about concepts she'd never heard before, using technical terms that sounded like a foreign language. Mom, how was it today? Ethan asked every day when she got home. Hard, Sarah admitted. Really hard. Sometimes I feel completely lost. But are you understanding anything? Some things, yes. And when I don't, I write everything. Down to look up later. Ethan helped his mother every night, reading through her college texts with her, making summaries and creating mind maps. Even when she didn't fully understand the material, her presence and support made all the difference. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. By the end of the first month, Sarah had taken her first exam. She was so nervous her hands shook as she wrote. So how did it go? Ethan asked when she got home. I don't know, Sarah replied, sinking into the chair. I answered everything, but I'm not sure if it was right. Mom, you studied so hard for this test. I saw you working every night. No matter the grade, you did your best. Week later, the results came in. Sarah had scored a 7.5 in business fundamentals and an 8.0 in financial mathematics. Mom, Ethan shouted when she told him the grades. Those are great scores. Really? Sarah asked, still unsure. Absolutely. The passing average is 6.0. You did amazing. Sarah felt a wave of relief and pride. She was doing it. Maybe it wasn't easy, but it was working. During the second month, things started flowing better. Sarah had adjusted to the college routine and made a few friends among her classmates. Carla, a 35-year-old woman who had also returned to school after some time, became her study partner. Sarah, Carla said one day, your dedication is impressive. I've never seen anyone work so hard. I just can't afford to fail, Sarah explained. There's too much at stake. Want to tell me what's going on? Carla asked with genuine curiosity. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but decided to trust her new friend. She shared the whole story, from the inheritance to the trial and the 6-month deadline. My God, Sarah, Carla exclaimed. What a tough situation, but you're doing great. Your grades are among the best in class. Really? Sarah asked, surprised. Really? And hey, if you ever need help with anything, count on me. Carla's friendship was crucial in helping Sarah feel more confident and settled in the college environment. At home, Ethan was also adapting well to the new routine. He had taken on several household chores and was doing better than ever in our school. His teachers noticed even greater maturity and an impressive sense of responsibility. "Ethan," Miss Sandra said one day after class, "can I talk to you?" "Of course, ma'am. I've noticed you've been even more focused and responsible lately. Is everything okay at home?" Ethan smiled. "Everything's great. Ma'am, my mum's in college and I'm helping her stay organized." "That's wonderful, Ethan. Your mum must be so proud of you, and I'm really proud of her," Ethan replied sincerely. By the third month, however, the first serious problems arose. Sarah was overwhelmed with work, school, and household responsibilities. She was sleeping only 4 hours a night and was clearly exhausted. "Mum, you need to rest more," Ethan said one evening, noticing her red eyes. "I can't, sweetheart. I have an important test on Friday and I still haven't studied everything." "But if you get sick, you won't be able to take the test at all." Sarah knew Ethan was right, but she felt the pressure of time. Every day that passed was one less day to prove she deserved to keep her son. On Thursday, the day before the test, Sarah fainted at work in the construction company's office. Her co-workers helped her and called an ambulance. Ethan was at school when he got the call from the hospital. "Hello," he answered, noticing it was an unknown number. "Ethan Parker, this is Mercy Hospital. Your mother was admitted here a little while ago and asked us to call you." Ethan felt the world spin. What happened to her? "She fainted at work. It seems to be extreme exhaustion, but she's stable. Can you come here?" Ethan asked to leave school and ran to the hospital. He found his mother on a gurney in the emergency room, pale and with an IV in her arm. "Mom," he said, rushing to hug her. "Hi, sweetheart," Sarah said weakly. "I'm sorry for scaring you." "What did the doctors say?" "That I'm exhausted, I need to rest more and eat better." Ethan felt guilty. He'd noticed his mother was overworking herself, but hadn't pushed hard enough for her to take care of her health. "Mom, you're going to miss tomorrow's test." Sarah closed her eyes, discouraged. "I know. And it was an important test. We'll talk to the professor, explain the situation. I'm sure he'll understand." "What if he doesn't? What if it hurts my final grade?" Ethan held his mother's hand. "Mom, remember what you taught me when I had pneumonia and missed several tests?" "What?" "That health comes first, always. That it's no use succeeding in school if we're not well enough to enjoy it." Sarah smiled faintly. "Using my own words against me again." "It's because your words are always right," Ethan said, kissing his mother's hand. The next day, Ethan went with Sarah to the university to talk to the professor about the missed test. Professor Mark, a man in his 50s, welcomed them into his office. "Mrs. Sarah, I heard you weren't feeling well yesterday. How are you?" "Now?" "Better, thank you, Professor, but I'm worried about the test I missed." The professor looked at Ethan and then at Sarah. "Is this your son?" "Yes, this is Ethan. I've heard a lot about you both. Your story has reached the ears of several professors." Ethan was surprised. "It has. Of course. A mother who returns to school at 42 to prove she deserves to keep her son is an inspiring story. We're all rooting for you, Sarah." Sarah was moved by the professor's words. "About the test," he continued, "don't worry, I'll give you a makeup test next week. And let me offer some advice. Take care of your health. There's no point in having excellent grades if you harm yourself in the process." As they left the professor's office, Ethan and Sarah felt renewed. They weren't fighting alone. There were good people rooting for them. "Mom," Ethan said as they walked across the university campus, "I think we need to rethink our strategy." "What do you mean?" "You're trying to be perfect at everything. Work, school, home. That's impossible. No one can be perfect at everything at the same time." Sarah stopped walking and looked at her son. "But if I'm not excellent at everything, they'll say I'm not capable of taking care of you. Mom, being a good mother doesn't mean being perfect. It means doing your best within your limits and taking care of your health so you can take care of others." Ethan held his mother's hand. "Remember what you told me when I wanted to quit soccer because I wasn't the best on the team? That the important thing wasn't being the best, but giving your best and enjoying the process." Exactly. You're giving your best. Your grades are good, you're learning, you're growing. You don't have to be the top student in the class to prove you're a good mother. Sarah hugged her son right there in the middle of the campus. How did you get so wise at 10 years old? I learned from the best teacher in the world, Ethan replied, pointing at her. From that day on, Sarah started taking better care of herself. She lightened her study load, began sleeping at least 6 hours a night, and accepted more help from Ethan with household chores. Her grades remained good, but more importantly, she was healthier and happier. During the 4th month, they received their first visit from the social worker. Mrs. Patricia, a 50-year-old woman with extensive experience in family cases, arrived at the apartment on a Wednesday afternoon. "Good afternoon, Ethan," she greeted when he opened the door. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Patricia. My mom is on her way home from college. Would you like to come in?" Mrs. Patricia stepped inside the apartment and looked around. The place was clean and tidy, with college books scattered on the kitchen table and walls decorated with drawings Ethan had made when he was younger. "Did you draw these?" she asked, pointing at the walls. "I did when I was little. My mom kept them all and said they make our apartment brighter." "And they really do," Mrs. Patricia agreed, smiling. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, carrying a backpack full of books. "Sorry I'm late, Mrs. Patricia. The class ran a little long." "No problem. How are your studies going?" "Good, thank goodness. My grades have been fine and I'm learning a lot." Mrs. Patricia spent 2 hours talking with them, asking about their routine, studies, and Ethan's feelings about their situation. She was clearly impressed by the boy's maturity and Sarah's dedication. "Ethan," she asked at the end of the visit, "do you have any complaints about your life here with your mom?" "Complaints?" Ethan repeated, thinking, "Well, I wish our place were bigger so I could have my own room, and I wish we could have a dog. Oh, and that my mom didn't have to work so much." Mrs. Patricia smiled. "Those are very normal complaints for a kid your age. And do you feel safe and loved here?" "Completely," Ethan answered without hesitation. "I couldn't feel safer anywhere else in the world." When Mrs. Patricia left, she was smiling. "You're on the right track," she said. "Keep it up." By the 5th month, something happened that tested the family's determination again. Ethan came down with a bad flu that kept him bedridden for a week. Sarah was torn between caring for her son and not missing important college classes. She ended up skipping 3 days in a row to stay with Ethan. "Mom, you should go to class," Ethan said weakly between sneezes and coughs. "Not a chance. You're sick. You need care. But you'll miss important material." "Ethan," Sarah said firmly, "you're more important than any class. Always have been, always will be." When Ethan recovered, Sarah realized she had missed several key concepts in the classes she'd skipped. She tried to catch up by studying with Carla, but she was clearly struggling. The next test would cover the topics she'd missed, and Sarah was nervous. "Mom, what if you do poorly on this test?" Ethan asked worriedly. "Then I'll study twice as hard for the next one," Sarah replied with determination. "That's not what I meant. What if Mrs. Patricia or Judge William think you can't handle everything?" Sarah stopped studying and looked at Ethan. "Son, remember what happened in court, what you said about the lessons we learn from our choices. I remember. If I had left you when you were sick just to go to class, what kind of lesson would that be? That work is more important than family, that when the people we love need us, we should abandon them to focus on our responsibilities." Ethan understood her point. "You're saying that even if it hurts your grades, it was the right choice." "Exactly. And you know what? I think Mrs. Patricia and Judge William will understand that too, because any real mother would do the same." Sarah took the test at the end of that week and scored a 6.5. It wasn't his best grade, but it was still above average. When Mrs. Patricia made her second visit, she asked about the period when Ethan had been sick. "How was that time?" she asked. "Ethan, my mum took really good care of me. She stayed with me the whole time, made tea, soup, gave me medicine right on schedule. I felt so loved." "And you, Sarah? How did you feel having to miss college?" "I didn't feel bad for even a second," Sarah answered honestly. "My son needed me. There was nowhere else I'd rather be." Mrs. Patricia nodded approvingly. That's exactly the answer I'd expect from a good mother. In the 6th and final month of the evaluation period, the tension was at its peak. There were only 2 weeks left until the final hearing that would decide their future. Sarah had managed to keep her grades at a good level, was healthy and clearly happy with her studies. Ethan continued to excel in school and showed impressive emotional stability. But they knew Walter and Martha Thompson wouldn't give up easily. A week before the final hearing, Ethan was coming home from school when he saw a car parked in front of his building. Inside were 2 people he didn't recognize, but they seemed to be watching the building. Ethan pretended not to notice and walked into the building as usual. But when he got to the apartment, he told his mother about the suspicious car. "Do you think they were people hired by our great-uncle and aunt?" he asked. "It's possible," Sarah replied, worried. "They might be looking for anything they can use against us in the final hearing. Then we have to be even more careful this last week." Sarah nodded. "Ethan, are you sure you want to go through all this? If you want to go live with your great-uncle and aunt, I'll understand. Maybe they really can give you opportunities I can't." Ethan looked at his mother seriously. "Mom, remember that time you asked if I wanted a new dad, when that man George was interested in you? I remember. And remember my answer. You said you already had the perfect family for you and didn't need anything else." "Exactly. And I still feel the same way. You're my family. You're all I need." Sarah hugged her son, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility. On the eve of the final hearing, they got an unexpected call. It was Mrs. Nancy from the veterinary clinic. "Sarah, sweetheart, I heard tomorrow's the day of the final decision." "Yes, Mrs. Nancy. I want you to know I'm rooting for you both. And if you need anything at all, just call me." "Thank you, Mrs. Nancy. Your friendship has meant so much during this time." "Sarah, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Are you scared?" Sarah looked at Ethan, who was doing his homework at the kitchen table. "I'm very scared," she admitted, "but I also have a lot of hope. We've done everything we could. Now we just have to trust that justice will be served." That night, Ethan and Sarah sat on the bed to talk before sleeping. "Mum, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know I'm proud of you." "Why?" "Because you proved you can do anything when you're motivated. You're in college, getting good grades, learning new things every day. You've grown so much these 6 months." Sarah smiled. "We've grown together, son. You've changed a lot too. You've become even more mature, more responsible, wiser." "You know the biggest lesson I've learned these 6 months?" Ethan asked. "What?" "That it doesn't matter what others think about our family. What matters is what we know about our love. And I know you love me more than anything in the world, and I love you just the same." Sarah kissed her son's forehead. "That's the only truth that really matters," she agreed. On the morning of the final hearing, they woke up early and dressed carefully. Sarah had bought a new suit for Ethan with part of the money they'd saved over the past few months. She, herself, wore a simple yet elegant dress. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked as she adjusted her son's tie. "I'm ready," Ethan replied confidently. When they arrived at the courthouse, a surprise awaited them. Mrs. Nancy was there, along with Carla, her college friend, Professor Mark, Mrs. Patricia, the social worker, and several others who had become important in their lives over the past few months. "What are you all doing here?" Sarah asked, moved. "We came to support you," Mrs. Nancy answered, "because we know you deserve to stay together." Ethan felt warmth in his chest. They truly weren't alone in this fight. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, across the lobby, Walter and Martha Thompson were speaking nervously with Mr. Richard. They had also brought support. Several friends from the local high society, former employees, people who could testify about their financial and social standing. When the hearing began, the judge seemed more relaxed than the first time. "We are here to evaluate the results of the 6-month trial period," he announced. "I will first call the social worker responsible for monitoring, Mrs. Patricia Wilson." Mrs. Patricia stood and walked to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, during the 6 months of monitoring, I made 5 unannounced visits to the Parker family's residence. On every occasion, I found a clean, organized, and loving environment." She opened her folder and checked some notes. "Ethan," Shows excellent emotional development, exemplary grades in school, and a very healthy relationship with his mother. Sarah, in turn, has managed to maintain an impressive balance between work, studies, and motherhood. "And what is your recommendation?" the judge asked. "I recommend custody remain with the biological mother, without restrictions," Mrs. Patricia replied clearly. Ethan and Sarah exchanged relieved glances, but knew there were still more questions to answer. The judge then called Professor Mark to testify about Sarah's academic progress. "Professor, how do you assess Mrs. Sarah Parker's progress over these 6 months?" "Your Honor, Sarah Parker is one of the most dedicated students I've had in 30 years of teaching. Her grades are consistently above average, and more importantly, she demonstrates a genuine thirst for knowledge." The professor paused. "She faced some challenges mid-semester when she had to care for her sick son, but how she handled it only confirmed her priorities were right. She would never put studies above her child's well-being." "And do you believe she has the ability to manage a significant inheritance?" "Absolutely. In the next 2 years, she will have sufficient theoretical and practical knowledge to make responsible financial decisions. Moreover, she already shows a natural prudence with money that many of my younger students lack." Mr. Richard stood to ask his questions. "Professor, didn't Mrs. Sarah struggle to keep up with the pace of younger students?" "At first, yes, but that's normal. In fact, more mature students often perform better in the long run because they have more discipline and focus." "And what about the absences when her son was sick? Didn't that hurt her performance?" "The absences were justified, and she caught up on all the missed material. Any responsible mother would have done the same." Mr. Richard realized he wasn't finding any weaknesses in the testimony and sat back down. The judge then called Ethan to speak. "Ethan, how do you feel after these 6 months?" Ethan stood up confidently. "Your Honor, I feel proud of my mother and happy with our life. These have been the best 6 months we've ever had." "Why?" "Because for the first time my mother was able to pursue a dream of hers. I watched her grow, learn, and challenge herself, and that taught me it's never too late to change and improve." Ethan looked at Walter and Martha Thompson. "My great-uncle and aunt can give me many material things, but they can't give me the life lesson my mother gave me in these 6 months." "What lesson?" "That when you truly love someone, you're willing to step out of your comfort zone, face challenges, and change and grow. My mother reinvented herself to give me the best. That's real love." The judge nodded, clearly impressed. "Ethan, do you have any fears about the future?" "I'm afraid I won't be able to repay all the love my mother gives me," Ethan answered honestly. "I'm afraid of disappointing her someday, but I'm not afraid of staying with her. With her, I feel safe to face any challenge." Mr. Richard tried one last strategy. "Ethan, don't you feel like you lost part of your childhood taking care of your mother in the house?" Ethan looked at the lawyer with a serious expression. "Mr. Richard, do you think helping the person I love most in the world is losing my childhood? Or do you think it's learning what really matters in life?" "Well, it depends." "It doesn't depend," Ethan interrupted. "I'm 10 years old, and I already know that love, loyalty, and commitment are the most important values there are. Many adults go their whole lives without learning that." Ethan turned to the audience. "Do you know the difference between me and other kids my age? I don't just receive love, I also know how to give love. I'm not just cared for, I also know how to care. That's not losing my childhood, it's gaining a meaningful life." The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause from several people in the audience. The judge banged the gavel to restore order. "Very well. Ethan, you may sit down." The judge then addressed Walter and Martha Thompson. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, would you like to make any final remarks?" Walter stood up reluctantly. Over the past 6 months, he had witnessed a transformation he hadn't expected. Sarah had truly managed to prove she was capable. "Your Honor," he began hesitantly, "I admit that Mrs. Sarah has made more progress than we thought possible." Martha nudged her husband, whispering something in his ear. "However," Walter continued, "we still believe we can offer better educational and social opportunities for Ethan." Ethan stood up again. "May I respond, Your Honor?" The judge nodded. Uncle Walter, what are the 3 things that make me happiest in life? Walter fell silent, clearly not knowing the answer. You don't know, do you? Ethan continued. They are playing soccer with the kids in my building, reading comic books at the library, and helping my mum with her studies. Now tell me, what's my favorite food? What's my biggest fear? What's my dream for the future? Walter remained silent. My mother knows all those answers, Ethan said gently, because she built her life around knowing every detail of mine. You want to give me opportunities, but you don't know which opportunities I really want. Ethan walked closer to his great-uncle and aunt. And you know what? It's not your fault. You didn't have the chance to know me because you turned your back on my family for 8 years. Now you want to make up for lost time, but that's not how it works. Martha Thompson's eyes were wet with tears. Love isn't something you can buy with money or opportunities, Ethan concluded. It's something you build day after day, with presence, care, and dedication. My mother built that love with me over 10 years. We can't just start from scratch now. Ethan moved closer to his mother. But I don't hold any grudges against you. If you truly want to be part of my life, as great uncles who care about me but respect my mother, I'd be happy. But if you're trying to replace my mother, then we're not talking about love anymore, we're talking about possession. The impact of Ethan's words was visible throughout the courtroom. Even Mr. Richard seemed shaken. The judge leaned back in his chair and stayed silent for several minutes, clearly reflecting on everything he had heard. This is one of the most extraordinary cases I've witnessed in my career, he finally said. Rarely do we see such a clear display of true love, dedication, and personal growth. Ethan and Sarah held hands, ready to hear the final decision. Mrs. Sarah Parker, the judge continued, you not only met all the requirements set 6 months ago, but you surpassed all expectations. Your college grades are excellent, your dedication as a mother is undeniable, and your personal growth is inspiring. Sarah took a deep breath, still nervous. Young Ethan, the judge addressed the boy, your maturity, intelligence, and ability to express yourself are truly impressive. But more important than that is your unconditional love for your mother and your deep understanding of what truly matters in life. Ethan nodded respectfully. Therefore, the judge announced, full custody of Ethan Parker will remain permanently with his biological mother, Sarah Parker. The inheritance will be managed as originally proposed. A court-appointed trustee will oversee expenses until Ethan turns 18, at which point he will assume full control of the funds. Ethan and Sarah embraced, crying with relief and happiness. Around them, the friends who had come to support them celebrated quietly. Furthermore, the judge added, I strongly recommend that the Wilson family seek a healthy reconciliation with Ethan and Sarah. This boy deserves to know his family roots, and you deserve the chance to be part of his life, as long as you respect the family structure already in place. Walter and Martha Wilson exchanged glances. The ruling wasn't what they had expected, but Ethan's words had touched something deep in their hearts. This hearing is adjourned, the judge declared, striking the gavel one final time. As they left the courtroom, Ethan and Sarah were surrounded by their supportive friends. Mrs. Nancy hugged them with tears in her eyes. Carla congratulated Sarah on her success, and Professor Mark said he was proud to have such a special student. On the other side of the courtyard, Walter and Martha Wilson walked slowly toward the parking lot, accompanied by Mr. Richard. It was a fair decision, Martha murmured. What do you mean? Walter asked, surprised. Walter, did you hear that boy speak? Did you see the love between them? How could we ever think it was right to separate a family like that? Walter sighed. You're right, Martha. I was so focused on the money and the opportunities that I forgot what really matters. Mr. Richard bid them farewell, clearly disappointed with the outcome, but acknowledging it had been the right decision. Walter looked back and saw Ethan and Sarah chatting animatedly with their friends. For a moment, he felt the urge to approach them, to apologize, to try and build a bridge. Do you think they'd forgive us? He asked Martha. Ethan said he doesn't hold grudges. If we're sincere, if we really want to be part of his life while respecting his mother, I think so. Walter made a decision. He approached Ethan and Sarah, who stopped talking when they saw him coming. "Ethan," Walter said nervously, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Ethan looked at his mother, who nodded. "Of course, Uncle Walter. I wanted to apologize for everything, for looking down on your mother all these years, for trying to keep you apart, for not being the great uncle you deserved." Ethan listened in silence. "You were right when you said, 'I don't know you,'" Walter continued. "And you were right when you said love can't be bought. Your mother is an extraordinary woman, and you're an amazing boy. I was a fool." "Uncle Walter," Ethan said gently, "we all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them. Would you give me a chance to start over? To be a real great uncle, one who respects and supports your family?" Ethan looked at his mother again. Sarah nodded with a smile. "Of course, Uncle Walter, but on one condition." "What?" "You have to teach me about our family history. I want to know about my grandfather Charles, what my father was like as a child, understand where I come from." Walter smiled for the first time in months. "It would be an honor, Ethan." Martha stepped closer too. "Sarah," she said hesitantly, "can you forgive me for judging you without knowing you?" Sarah reached out her hand. "Of course, Martha. Now we're family." In the months that followed, Ethan and Sarah's lives changed completely. With court supervision of the inheritance expenses, they were able to move to a bigger apartment, where Ethan finally had his own room. Sarah kept working, but with reduced hours, dedicating more time to her studies. Her grades remained excellent, and she discovered a special talent for financial management. Ethan adopted the dog he'd always wanted, a caramel-colored mutt. He named Yankees after his favorite team. Walter and Martha became constant presences in their lives, but in a healthy and respectful way. They took Ethan on educational outings on weekends, shared family stories, and helped financially when needed, but without trying to control or interfere with Sarah's decisions. 2 years later, Sarah graduated from college with honors. Ethan was in the front row at the graduation ceremony, clapping louder than anyone else, just as he'd promised. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he said as she stepped off the stage with her diploma in hand. "We did it, son," Sarah replied, hugging Ethan. "Together we did it all." "And now," Ethan asked, "what's the next dream we're going to make come true?" Sarah smiled. "Now I want to get a master's in asset management. I want to be the best financial manager I can be, to make sure your inheritance is well taken care of, and that you have every opportunity you deserve. And I want to keep studying hard to become a man who makes you even prouder," Ethan answered. "Son, you already make me proud every single day," Sarah said, kissing his forehead. When they got home that night, Ethan found a surprise waiting. For him, Walter and Martha had organized a small celebration for Sarah's graduation. There was cake, sweets, and even a few gifts. "This is for you," Martha said, handing Sarah a package. Inside was a photo album of the Wilson family, with pictures of grandfather Charles, Ethan's father as a child, and several generations of the family. "Now you're officially part of our family's history," Walter explained. Ethan flipped through the album with fascination, seeing for the first time the faces of relatives he'd never known. "Did my dad look like me when he was little?" he asked, pointing to a photo. "Very much," Martha answered. "He was also very smart and determined, just like you." "And my grandfather, what was he like?" "Charles was a wise and fair man," Walter recounted. "He always said that a family's true wealth isn't in money, but in the love and unity among its members." Ethan looked at his mother. "I think he'd be proud to see how we've stood up for our family." "I'm sure he would," Sarah agreed. That evening, as Sarah organized her graduation materials and Ethan played with his Yankees gear in the backyard, they reflected on the extraordinary journey they'd been through. They had started as a small, simple family, facing a threat that seemed impossible to overcome. But through love, determination, and hard work, they hadn't just won, they had grown stronger. The inheritance of $15 million was secure, being managed wisely. Sarah was preparing to take full responsibility for it. Ethan remained a bright and loving boy, now with an extended family supporting him. But more than anything, they had proven to themselves and the world that true love can conquer any obstacle. "Mom," Ethan said before bed that night. "Do you remember that day in court when I said we wanted our life back, only better?" "I do." "We got exactly that, didn't we?" Sarah smiled. "We got so much more than that, son. We got a dream life, built with our own hands. And you know the best part. What? This is just the beginning. We still have a whole life ahead of us to keep growing together." Sarah kissed her son and turned off the light. Outside, the stars shone in the sky, illuminating a family that had learned there's no greater strength in the world than the love between a mother and son, determined to fight for each other. The end. So, what did you think of this heartwarming story? Didn't little Ethan's courage in defending his mother touch your heart? Tell us in the comments which moment moved you the most and whether you believe true love can really move mountains. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that go straight to the heart.